So I'd like to welcome Sophia Chen, who will talk about OpenStreetMap coastal landforms and so on.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia, and I work for the Canadian Red Cross, La Croix-Rouge Canadienne. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about coastal mapping and how we can make it better in OpenStreetMap. So I just want to start with some stats. Canada actually has the longest coastline in the world with 202,000 kilometers. And for those who are not really aware, we actually have 3 different coasts. We have the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. So that's the reason why the title is Coast to Coast to Coast. And we can also see that the UK is not bad with 12,000 kilometers of coast. So we can see that, so we can see that Canada has a predominantly higher and longer, number of kilometers in terms of coastline. So this is really a huge topic for us. But the reason why we're doing it across the Atlantic, because many of the features we would have on the coastal side would actually have similar, quite similar, but not exactly the same, but some similar landform features. So it would be interesting to look at how Europeans, for example, the UK, Norway, Greenland, Denmark, so many of these countries map their coast. So before we start, I'd like to do a small activity. So in one word, what does the coast represent for you? So we also are aware that there is a cultural dimension to the coast. And that's also kind of explain why, a lot of coastal regions are quite dangerous or are becoming more and more dangerous with climate change. And people are still staying there, knowing that there's going to be, flooding, there's going to be a lot of issues with their houses and insurance, but they still want to stay. Because probably they feel belonging, they feel there's memories, or maybe there's some reasons why people stay. So please, can I just go out of the presentation and go to Menti? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's see. So please feel free to go on to menti.com and join. There's still 5 people. Okay, 3 people. Yeah, so we can really see the diversity of what it means to people, and it's not just objectively, beach or wetland. It's words with connotations to emotions and feelings and forces, wind, fishy, smell. That's great. All right. Yeah, so homes stands out. It's interesting. Infinity, wow. All right, so I'll go back to the presentation here. So as we can see, the coast isn't just a line, even though when we're out on the map and what we see is just a line. But the reality is, on itself, it is a living system, and for many of individuals and communities out there, it means all the things that we've just talked about. So especially also in humanitarian and climate risk context, the coast is very much alive, and it's very much important because it determines how people experience storms, flooding, erosion, access, and even isolation. So that connects with your experience earlier with fishy or home, right? So you see the coast much more as an experience. However, right now, most planning and risk assessments still rely heavily on flood maps. Flood maps are not bad, and they're intrinsically very important, but they only show where water goes, so how far the water is going to go inland, for example. But they don't show what the water is going to hit once it's inland. And that's the core missing piece. So the behavior of coastal hazard is shaped not just by water levels, but by the landforms and materials that make up the coast itself. So when a storm hits the coastline, the impact isn't determined only by the water level, it's determined by what the water is going to hit and interacts with, right? So if you think about how the different landforms here would actually influence how the water would impact risk, right? So for example, a dune system would absorb wave energy. If you think about it, it's like a natural flood barrier. A marsh edge, for example, would actually slow water, trap sediment, and it could even reduce surge height. And a cobble versus a beach that's fully sand, so the material that's on the beach, it would actually also respond differently because of that material to wave, energy, and to water, right? So if you think about it, coastal landforms and materials do have a huge impact on the type and severity of the risk at the end of the day, and we don't have that much information and knowledge about it. So if we look at where are the data and where's knowledge, you're gonna see there's an issue here, which is fragmentation. So outside of OSM, if you basically just Google the name of your country and coastal landform maps, you're gonna find it. However, you're probably gonna find one map, about waves, wave energy with, like coastal data, with weather stations, and then you're gonna get wetland on another map. So coastal information is really scattered across different actors' websites and different kinds of data, different data formats as well. And you can see how different features are classified very differently from one country to another. And the other issue is often outdated and doesn't respond to the continuous action of erosion, right? So that's where OSM comes in. So OSM does have fragmentation too, so I'm going to show it after. How and what can we do about it for now? But we do have to reconcile with the idea that we need something that gets updated very often and quickly, and OSM lets us do this. Plus all the other wonderful and powerful advantages, including a community whose members talk to each other, which is what we do right now. Because other agencies who are working on, coastal mapping, they don't always do it. So that's also another advantage of OSM. So I would say the main objective of today's discussion session, I wanted to do panel, but then the session got switched in terms of time and it was hard. So we're gonna do a discussion in group and basically look together what we can do to build coastal mapping OSM that's more accurate, comparable across landscapes, and more resilient, so the data can truly support the communities living on these coasts, which include you and me. So so when I was talking about OSM data, so I started with a comparative study across the Atlantic because we have very similar typology in terms of coastal landforms. And you're gonna see with the tags that people are using, a lot of landforms are coming back a lot. So theoretically speaking, like these are not the words we use usually to describe the landscape. I can quickly tell you what they are, but I think it's just gonna be very shitty to put them there. So there's actually 6 types of coastal landforms that can basically summarize and describe all the coastal, the majority, 80 to 90% of all coastal landscape across the countries we see here. First is rocky headland, big coasts with pocket beaches. Number 2, high sea cliffs, rock platforms, sea stacks and arches. 3, sand beach and dune systems. 4, skerries, rocky island and nearshore reefs. 5, drawn valleys, fjord, rias, estuaries. 6, intertidal flats, salt marshes and coastal wetlands. Remember anything I say, okay? It doesn't matter. It's just these are the words that scientists use to describe the coast, okay? Now, look at the words that people are using to describe the same coast. How different they are from what I just read. Okay, so there's already a simplification process that comes from the scientific or the authoritative data kind of way of describing what the coast looks like versus, human beings, what's our experience, right? Because we experience the coast with our feet, so we know, is it sand, is it rock, right? And if it's wet, well, it's wetland. So basically, we do experience the coast very differently from the scientist. And that's another issue right now, is because when you're doing mapping OSM, you no longer have that experience with the coast. You're doing it remotely with the imagery. So that's one of the biggest issue we have with coastal mapping, is that there are 3 ways, I would say, of seeing the coast. The three major way of seeing is, the scientific people with very strange and complicated vocabulary. Number two is you and me, right? With our sensory systems, like we just experienced the coast. And the third system is basically remote sensing, where you can only see one perspective of how it looks like at a certain point and a certain season of the day. And you're gonna see why this actually complicates coastal mapping a lot. Now, we pulled out like the most common tags for each region, and the reason why I put green, tidal, flat, and bug, because they do stand out. Because for me, it's not always obvious how to distinguish them from the imagery. And you can see that there is literally like a battle between these two terms. And then there's shingle and how do you pronounce that in English? Heath, right? They're very, very common, mostly in France and England. It's not really a word we use in our vocabulary in North America. So I can also see there's also an interesting difference with the words we use, right? Yeah, so this is the original data we had. So we pulled this data from Overpass Turbo. I love it. And the reason why you cannot find like natural equals to beach is because there's just too much data and I'm not able to have it. So these are, I would say, categories of landforms that we can see. And I highlighted in red two specific ones because that was one of the most shocking observation I had, was that these, according to me, are the easiest or most beginner-friendly landform tags we can use. But they are very, very rare. We can find, like, I don't know why, but like people really like complicated concept, like tidal flat. I didn't even know what's tidal flat. Like, I'm a physical geographer. Like, I don't remember tidal flat, like at school. And then like bog, I wasn't sure, and anyway, so that was very interesting. And I was trying also to see what are the issues that we could have with, cliff or beach plus surface, why it's not that common. And then I realized how one of the other issues we have is material versus landform. There can be a confusion, right? So beach and pebbles, sometimes it can be also mixed up with shingle. Okay, so shingle would be like the landform type, but beach is like a more general type and pebble is like material. So shingle have pebbles, but also other materials. So anyway, so I do feel like maybe if people don't understand using composite tagging also can be difficult. So people maybe they're just used to tagging one thing and not having like to tag a sub tag like surface. So that may be one of the reasons why it's not that used. And then for cliff, what I realized that in my head and probably in your head too, a cliff is easily identifiable, right? When you go to a place, you're like, oh God, you look down there, you're like, ooh. Right? It's a cliff. But then there is the question of perspective. When you're looking from space, cliffs becomes harder to identify than when you're on the human scale, when you're walking, right? So you also have to think about when you switch perspective, how some landforms would actually become harder to recognize. Yeah, and I was using Overpass Turbo, and I look at some independent geomorphological studies and see if there's overtag or undertag of certain tags. So yeah, so it's just something that I find really interesting, and you can see that. So when it's positive, is wait a second, is overtag, yeah, and the minus is like undertag. So I don't really want to go into details, but these are some of the issues that we have seen. Yeah, and what I highlighted can be questions that we're going to discuss a little bit later. So I was just wondering, how we can synchronize certain references, like tidal references. So for example, when I was talking about how different time of the day, the imagery would be different. So for example, if you want to do wetland, well, the surface, like how big the wetland is going to be, depends largely on the season and the time of the day of the imagery, right? So there's also all these uncertainties. And yeah, so I'll come back to here after. So I want to go into like fun stuff for now. Okay, so also people are very interested in knowing why I spend so much time doing that comparative study and everything is because we like to map Newfoundland, one of the provinces that is the most undermapped in Canada because it's very, very large and has very, very small population and a very, very long coastline, okay? So this is an example of the coastline we have around the second biggest city of Newfoundland. And you can see how, I was wondering how you would map this. Anyone wants to try? Yeah, is there a cliff? Is there wetland? I know, right? This is very difficult. And I went into Zoom, the largest Zoom I could get. I asked my professor at university. That was his answer. Natural equals to coastline. So basically what we have to be really careful about is also area versus line. So the difficulty with cliff, for example, is that it's a line. So let's say if you see that it's a large place and it's a polygon of cliff, well, you can only do a line. Yeah, that's what my professor told me. He would tag it this way. But then what's also interesting is there's no definite answer to this question. And when I go to Government of Canada's data, the data was so complicated and there's 10 to 12 different terms to describe the coast and yeah. Oh yeah, the shoreline, very interesting question. So if you go onto wiki of OSM, they're gonna define shoreline as where I think water and land. Anyways, it's like, yeah, it's mean water. So it's related to water. So basically there's two ways, okay? One is to say, well, water and land. So where land appears and where water ends and land appears, that's the shoreline. The other way of mapping it is looking at the rock and be like, where does it stop? Like the wet area, right? The wet area would be like the actual shoreline. So there's basically two shorelines, even then. So then, it's important, but I don't know. There's no definite answer, right? Yeah, so let's have some fun here. Now, what we want to see is how OSM depicts these shorelines. So this is real imagery, and this is what it looks like in OSM. Guess the place here. The horizontal lines to see if you're familiar with your symbology in OSM. Marsh? Someone else? Yeah. General wetland, marsh. Yay, tidal flat. Yeah. Yay. Wetland equals to tidal. So this is not the good answer, okay? This is what is currently tagged right now in OSM. So I'm very confused with this heath thing, right? I cannot see heath. So you can also look at this and think about how do we validate or how do we ensure data quality for coastal mapping in OSM. So we've been going through many examples like this and we're like, I'm not sure if this is right. Okay, next one. I think this is very easy, okay, guys? Yeah. Sand? I don't know. Right. Natural equals to beach, surface equals to sand. I think the person just wants to simplify it and yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. But we oh wow. Yeah, but the The issue here is that it's a highly simplified version of it. So if someone's like, okay, I look at this map, especially for humanitarian action, surface equals to sand, then there must not be rocks in it, so I can run bare feet on there and it's fine. But the reality is maybe not, because you can see some small pieces of rocks, right? So now this is a more, I don't know how to explain this, but it doesn't look like it's, no, you know, in imagery. So I don't know. This is really hard. So my intern found this photo and we were like, okay, this is so intriguing because the difference, it's, yeah. So that's what they did. Natural equals to peak, natural equals to bare rock, natural equals to cliff. But the water lines are also very different. Maybe we can close the light. Could that help? Oh, okay. Oh, oh, is this better? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do think that's a title issue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not famous. It's a random place. Yeah, okay. So I just want to show like a few examples of how, like what may be the issues. So for example, this one, yeah, so I'm just gonna go a little bit quickly. Yeah, wetland equals to bog. So apparently that's what the bog looks like. And again, there's a huge discrepancy between what the image looks like. So, and the map, yes. 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 So what we wanted to show is that how wetlands are living systems and they can grow, right? And yeah, and vegetation can grow, they can die, they can change color, they can, you know, and so there's an issue, I would say, of timelessness here. Yeah. And this is apparently just shingles. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah, apparently this is just shingles. What do you think? Yeah, so what I find really interesting is the space between these two. Um, so there's also, I don't know, there's also some beaches inside that are not mapped. Yeah, so I was also wondering about the definition of the coast. So is the coast only outside when you have these islets? I don't know how to call them. Yeah, so how do you define that coast? Is the coast facing the inner side also part of the coast that we should map? Now it's time to even, I think you can scan it again. Even more fun stuff. Okay, yeah. Can you reconnect? I feel like I have to use these. At the yes, yes, yes. Okay, so oops. It's okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna do this so you can see the image at the same time. Can you see the image? Yeah, so that's number one. It is in Brittany, France, and this is the quality of imagery we're working with, unfortunately, for some places. So, how would you tag it? Yeah, so we don't. So the thing that we're trying to do today is to see if we can arrive to some consensus and be like, I know that perception and knowledge and expertise level of people are very different, but if we want to popularize coastal mapping and we want to make it more accessible for people, I think it's really important that we use vocabulary that we mentioned earlier. So basically, easier vocabulary, easier words for people to understand. Yeah, so I'm trying to see like how can we make this easier, maybe even for a kid who's not a kid, maybe a teenager, like 16 years old, 18 years old, like if he or she wants to participate, like yes. Mm. Mm. Is there sand? So what I suggest, so what we're trying to do is to see if there's a way to tag generally first. So generally speaking, what would be like the most general tag you would use, and then if you want to do a sub tag, you want to do a material, what would you put? But what if the sand is mixed with other things? Sorry. So what if the sand is mixed with other things? So yeah, so I do think that if we focus much more on material, it's going to be more accessible. But the thing with material is is often not only one material. Okay, so this is easier, but yeah, so that's also very interesting to see the beach. So about definition of the beach, there is natural sand, and then here it looks much more curated. Sorry, Cornwalls. The beach looks very curated, and it's also close to agricultural land. Um, oh my God, I didn't know how to change. You know what? Just like ignore Menti. That's just discuss. Yeah, so I was like, oh, that's really interesting to show how the beach here would be different from this beach, right? And like Christina, you said, maybe this one, well, I think there's altitude. So the sound that you see is probably higher up, and here is very much lower and closer to water. Right. So the reason why I took this image and I wanted to compare with that is if let's say this is the highest quality we can get for Brittany. I want to have the similar scale for Cornwalls. So you can see that the image quality plays a big role because this is supposed to be I think very similar scales. I wanted to stay in the same scale. And then the image quality and what you can see is very, very different. So, and then all the other coastal landscape around it, that is much more complicated, and we probably don't have the vocabulary for because in Iceland they actually have specific names for the geomorphological landscapes. So then there's this question of where are the limits that we're able to map if we go to other countries and we want to map other territories, right? Do we have to go into a full, terminology course to be able to tag these landforms that are unfamiliar for us? But these are in spatially like a very glacial spaces, so yeah. So I don't know if it's still the same terminology. Yeah, and then for Northwest Ireland, it's also beach again. It's all very unfamiliar landscape for me. So I was wondering if anyone knows what are the specific terms for these places or how is it special in Ireland? Okay. Yeah, and then last one, I don't know, I think there's too many. Western Scotland, I have this one. But yeah, just want to show one in Southwest Newfoundland. So what we're working with, so this is the code we're working with and we're trying to map. And so yeah, so we're basically looking at how you guys are mapping coast in Europe and see what kind of tagging practices we can develop because there's some things that are similar, but again, I think the way the forms of the beach is much more natural, raw, undeveloped. Yeah. So in that sense, we're looking at this. And we're like, we're not gonna say this is beach, right? We're gonna say. So no, that's the thing. Canada does not have LiDAR data set for this part. So they only did it for like the big provinces, Quebec, Ontario, BC, and this is too remote, so they didn't do LiDAR. Yeah, the best we can get in terms of topographic, it's 30 meters right now for this place, not 10. Yeah, we need to wrap up. Okay, thank you so much. And if you have any ideas, like please email me, just sophia.chin@redcross.ca. So we can continue that conversation. And if you have your own groups for mapping, I highly suggest that you work on coastal mapping because we really need this in OSM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I'm sure if there's plenty of people who are interested to keep talking to you. So yeah, there's plenty more to discuss. I'll leave you guys a few minutes to change rooms. And then in a few minutes, we'll continue with mappy.com.